All right, let's take a look at some other percent problems. Okay, Doug had budgeted $220 for textbook, but ended up spending $316.80. The amount he spent was what percent of his budget? So we're looking for percent. Okay, but let's see. The first thing we want to do is summarize what the question really says. The question really says the amount, right? I'm going to use AMT for amount. The amount he spent was what percent of his budget? Okay, well, this is the first really big keyword, was. That's really an equals, just like is. It's one of the to be verbs. To be verbs. Say that quick. To be verbs. To be verbs. Okay. Anyway, it's one of the to be verbs. So we're going to put an equal sign there. And now we're going to look at this. The amount he spent, okay, was what percent of his budget. So first we want the amount he actually spent. The amount he actually spent was $316.80. So the first thing we want to do is summarize what's going on in a short sentence, then take that and put it into words. Okay, put it into symbols. I'm sorry. Let's do that again. Summarize in a short sentence, and then put those words into symbols. Here we go. Was what percent? I have no idea. But be very careful, because at the end we're going to have to change that to a percent. We know how to change to a percent now, right? We just did that, so we know how to do that. Was what percent of is another good keyword, of his budget. And his budget was $220. So that's how that looks. All of that tells me exactly what to write down. So now I'm going to take $316.80, and this gives me a rash, because remember, technically, we want to write down the coefficient before the variable, and that's the equation we have. You know how to solve that. We now divide this by 220, because we have to get the coefficient to be 1. If we divide that by 220, we divide this by 220. Okay? Just to remind you of how you would divide this, we're not going to go through the actual division. If you're having trouble with it, call your instructor over, they'll help you. But just to remind you how to do this. This is an integer, so I don't have to move any decimals, and now I just start dividing. And x comes out to be, actually technically the x is on this side, I'm going to keep it on this side. X comes out to be 1.44. So 1.44 equals x, but remember we want what percent? That 1.44 is not a percent, it's just a number. We did nothing yet to change it to percent. We're going to do that right now. We're going to multiply by 100, or move the decimal 2 places to the right, because we're multiplying, which is 144%. Spent a lot more than he budgeted for. So that is the answer to that question. So cool. So the steps are, ready? Summarize the question in words, just like we did. Translate the words into symbols, and then solve as usual. Really simple. The hardest part about this is the words. Everybody says to me, you know, I just can't do these word problems. I just hate math. I can't do the word problems. I'm going to share something with you. The trouble you're having is not the math. It's the interpretation of the reading. Okay? More than you know it, what you're having, the real problem is the reading. I know everybody hates that, because everybody feels good, okay, about saying I can't do math, because that's okay. But as soon as we start saying, well, maybe it's the reading you're having trouble with, people freak out. The truth of the matter is, read it slowly. Make sure you know exactly what it's saying. That's the most important part. I know you think it's silly to summarize in words, but this is the most important part of what we just did. You have to have the words down in order to get the equation down. You cannot do this. I know a lot of you think, oh, my instructor does that really fast. I should just be able to read it and set up the equation. Nope. You have to summarize this. Whether we show you or not, we are summarizing that. Okay? So let's look at another question. All right, let's try this question. Bree received her first paycheck. Finally, Bree received her first paycheck. And 12.75% of it was withheld for income tax. Let's look, and we want to know how much was withheld. Let's look and see what we really are saying. We know 12.75% of her paycheck was withheld. Okay? So this is really the most important part of this, because we have to write this in words. Okay, first, so then we can get it in symbols. So let's look at 12.75% first thing I would do is change this fraction to a decimal. 3/4. Think about what you have if you have 3/4 in your pocket. Okay? You thinking? All right. Here we go. Let's do this. 4 does not go into 3. 4 goes into 37 times. That's 28. Subtract, we get 2. Put a 0 going here. Bring it down. 4 goes into 25 times. 4 times 5 is 20. So I now know that 3/4 was 0.75. You knew that, right? I figured you did. But 3/4 is 0.75. So I'm going to get rid of this work here so I can work up here. Here we go. My handy dandy. I think this walks away. I think it has legs. Okay. So that's 0.75. So that means this is 12.75%. It's still a percent. We did nothing to stop it from being a percent. Remember, to change something from a percent, we have to divide it by 100. We have not done that yet. All we did was take 3/4 and rename it 0.75. We just wrote it in a different way. Instead of a fraction, we wrote it as a decimal. Of means to multiply. Her paycheck. I think I have this memorized, that her paycheck was $180. And remember, the key word was. It's a to be verb, which means equals. Withheld. How much was withheld? I have no idea. Okay? So now I'm going to change this decimal, this percent. I'm going to change this percent to a decimal. Okay? Which means I have to divide by 100. When I divide by 100, I have to move this decimal 2 places to the left. So I move it 2 places to the left. And I get 0.1275 times 180, and that equals how much was withheld. When I multiply this, I get $22.95 was withheld for Bree. Sorry, Bree. Okay. Cool problem? Important. Absolutely important are those words. Okay, ready for another one? Let's try this next one. All right, let's take a look at this next question. I really wanted to get a moving slide here with the pump actually going and blood coming out, but I couldn't find one, sorry. All right, let's take a look at this question. A newspaper article stated that 648 pints of blood were donated at the blood bank last month. Oh, say that fast. Okay, which was only 72% of the number of pints needed. How many pints of blood were needed? If a woodchuck could chuck wood, how much wood could a woodchuck chuck? All right, here we go. All right, this is what I know. 72% of the pints needed, 72% of the pints needed was 648. That's what I know. Listen, again, a newspaper article stated that 648 pints of blood were donated. But that's 72% of the number of pints needed. So 72% of the number of pints needed was that 648. All the rest of that is garbage. A newspaper article says, who cares who stated it? Last week, all that stuff, who cares? Or last month, that's not important. This is the important part. This is the part you got to get. Okay? So 72%, this is easy. I'm going to change this percent to a decimal. To change the percent to a decimal, I'm going to divide by 100. So I'm going to move the decimal 2 places to the left. Remember, the decimal's here if I don't see it. So it's 0.72. Of tells me to multiply the pints needed. Well, I don't know how many pints were needed because that's the question. How many pints of blood were needed? So that's X. There's my keyword again, equals 648. So this is actually just 0.72X. Coefficient of X is 0.72 equals 648. We're on a roll. Okay, so now we have to divide. So we're going to divide by 0.72 because we need this coefficient to be a 1. Now it is. We're going to divide 0.72. Let me remind you how to divide. I'm not going to do the actual division, but I will remind you, just in case you've forgotten. Okay, remember the decimal for whole numbers at the end, to the right of the last digit. Now, I have to divide by an integer. So this is moving this over twice. I'm going to have to add 2 zeros. So what we're really doing is dividing 64,800 by 72. Okay, when we do that, we get X equals 900. So it's 900 pints. 900 pints of blood were needed. Awesome, huh? 900 pints of blood. Okay. One more question? Let's look. This question almost looks like a question we just did, okay, in a previous lesson. Let's take a look. In a 15-point quiz, Zenita earned 13 points. What percent correct is this? If necessary, round to the nearest whole percent. Okay. What we did in the last time we did this is we just did, I got 13 out of 15 points. Let me tell you why we could do this, okay? Because this was what this says. On a 15-point quiz, Zenita earned 13 points. What percent correct is this? Actually, this is truly what's going on if you want to write down all the words. I like that, but watch if I write down all the words. It's really what percent, because that's what we're looking for, is 13 out of 15. That's all we're doing. Is your equals. What percent? I have no idea. Is 13 out of 15. Done. That's exactly what we did before. We just didn't write it all out. Okay? And now we just divide. Remember how to divide? Right? We have to add zeros if we have no choice. And this comes out to be X equals, it comes out to be 0.86, and the 6 keeps repeating. But we want the nearest whole percent. Now remember, we want a percent, important, want a percent, important, want a percent. Ding, 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 want a percent. This is not a percent. We didn't do anything to make it a percent, because what do you have to do to make something a percent? You have to multiply by 100. So I'm going to take the next number that would be there, and I'll show you why. The next number would be a 6. I'm going to multiply it by 100, and it's 86.6%. You know why I needed that? Because I wanted to the nearest whole percent. I need this number to round. So I look. That's a 5 or higher, so that will go up 1. So my answer is 87%. Good job. Okay, let's look at something a little different. Let's look at percent change. Okay, kind of what I wanted to happen to my salary. Okay, Brad's hourly wage as an assistant manager was raised from $9.40 to $9.87. That's an hour. Okay. What was the percent increase? All right. Whether you're doing percent increase or percent decrease, that is really talking about a percent change. All you do is you take the difference between the numbers over the original amount. So let me show you how to do this problem. And that's in your workbook, by the way, that little procedure. The difference over the original. So let's see what's going on. Okay, let's take a look at Brad. His salary went from $9.40 an hour to $9.87 an hour. So this is what it was. This is what it is now. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to take the difference in his salary, which is 9.87, biggest number first, subtract 9.40, which is 47 cents, and we're going to divide it by the original. So we're going to take 0.47 and divide it by the original. The original salary was 9.40, or $9.40. Okay, by now we know how to divide. When we actually do this division, we get 0.05. But now we want the percent increase. The percent, and of course it's an increase because his salary went up. The percent increase, we need the percent. We need to multiply it by 100. Need percent. So we multiply this by 100. Remember, multiplying by 100 moves the decimal 2 places to the right. So we get 5%. And that's his increase, percent increase. That's it for Brad. All right, let's take a look at this difference. We said that this formula works, difference over the original and then change to a percent. It works in any time there's a percent change, whether increase or decrease, because that is a percent change, whether I go up or go down. So I always have to take the difference because that's the change, okay, over the original amount, because that's what we changed from. So let's take a look at another problem. That was a percent increase. The reason it was an increase was because his salary increased. Let's take a look at this next problem. Okay, Rosina trained for 6 months to run a marathon. Her weight dropped. Maybe she can run some miles for me. I'm really thinking about working out. But I'm thinking if I can let somebody else help me with that. Her weight dropped from 137 pounds to 122 pounds. So this is going to be a percent decrease, okay? So 137 pounds to 122 pounds. Find the percent decrease. If necessary, round to the nearest whole percent. Again, percent decrease or increase is a percent change. We're just going to do the same formula we just did, okay, which is we're going to first get the difference between the two numbers. So we're going to subtract these numbers, 137 minus 122, right, and that is 15. And then we're going to take the difference and divide it by the original amount. Okay, so the difference is 15. The original is 137. That's where she started. And we actually will do that division. And when we do that, we get 0.10948. And we keep going a little bit. Okay, it doesn't end there. But now we want to change that to a percent. That's the important part because it's percent increase. So we have to change that to percent. So we have to multiply that by 100. When we multiply that by 100, we have to move the decimal 2 places to the right. So we get 10.9%. However, we want it to the nearest whole percent. So I look at this number. That 9 tells me to move that up. So it's 11%. So it's a decrease of 11%. Okay? That takes care of some percent problems. Next thing we're going to do is some consumer applications.